So I wanted to talk about the topic of tenors and the actual vocal range because it's like a lot of people are misinformed, I think. They think that F2 is supposed to be like the where someone's tessitura is, for example, which is weird. Look at this. E2 is where a bass is on their lowest note. I would assume that's the lowest note that's really usable for them. Basically, this is the range overall for these people, basically. You know, I don't think the tessitura is not at F2 for baritone or tenor. Possibly for bass, definitely. Especially profundo bass, because they can really, really get down there. Really good. But tenors, they can't. I mean, most say, look at this. Baritone is A2 at the lowest, and A2 barely into the second octave, and tenors are C3 through C5. So some places will add B2 in there. Rare occasion A2, but not much further than that. Okay. So this is what's so odd. People acting like they should have the same vocal range as a bass if you are a contralto. Contraltos actually have a voice above tenors. Now, for me personally, this has always been tricky for me because it's always like, well, technically, I can sing all the way down to an F2. That's slightly above the bass. And you can kind of tell I can trill and do some weird stuff. I just was trilling and I was trilling like super low, lip trilling. So I can really get down there. But I think what's more interesting is the tessitura. Because if you pay attention to the tessitura of a bass, it's still not, I believe their tessitura was an A2 at the lowest. So someone like me, my tessitura starts at F3. That's very, very, very different than an A2, rightfully so, because the bass's tessitura starts at A2. So why would I start at A2? Why would that be a comfortable note for me? You know what I mean? People don't really pay attention to that. According to this chart, I would mostly fit with the tenor, honestly. Most of my notes are going to be in the C3 to C5 region, but I'm going to have a few on the other side of both sides of that. Now, contraltos, I would kind of fit with too on this chart. E3 through E5, that's slightly comparable, but it's just like, I feel like the E5 is a little too high for me, and I feel like, honestly, if I'm looking at a chart telling me what note to sing, I sing E3 fine, and I sing D3 and C3 fine. They're not as good as my tessitura, but they're okay. The way up to E5 is not my comfort level. I can't go up to E5 and I can go above that actually. I go all the way up to G5. If you can see this chart, I don't reach a mezzo soprano. I stop around the alto range, which alto is basically a light contralto from what I understand. Then I'm looking at different ranges for contraltos. Contraltos generally have F3 to F5 range, usually. That's what people usually say about their range. But from what I'm hearing, it can range basically, so some people sing a lot lower than that. And I've seen some people who say they can sing as low as like an A2 or something like that. That's why there's some people like me who can go all the way down to an F2. Now, another thing I wanted to point out was the baritone. See, another site, I wanted to show another shot, of A2 through G4 for baritone. This one says A2 through A4 for baritone again. Well, close enough. A4, G4. You get the difference. But as you can see, the baritone is all the way down to A2, not even F2. Okay? A lyric baritone isn't even an F2, and you guys are asking me to sing a projected form of an F2, yet a baritone can't even do that. Like, what? Why are you doing that? Then there's the whole thing here. Now, this was a lower setting for the voice types. It ranged a little bit. I'm using different places just to show that none of these places agree with any of you guys and your craziness. So, tenors are around B2 to G4, right? Baritones are G2 to E4. Bass is E2 to C4. So, for me, I would actually fit right below the below the baritone, still with the F2. But if you see that, obviously I'm not a baritone, so obviously my tessitura isn't going to be of a baritone. I can sing some baritone songs. Higher baritone is better, honestly, but tenor is still just a better option for me. So that's why I'm just showing here that, none of the places you're saying should designate tenors as low as you're saying they should sound. Okay, another place says tenors are C3 to C5. This is a common one. I often see C3 to C5. And this here is showing the tenorino vocal range, but it's specifically showing the tenorino's passagios. And I thought this was interesting because it's like, for me, I'm around an A4, and my passaggio on the lower end is around a D4, I guess, something like that. So it would be around this range right here. Now, the tenorino is not the typical tenor, but it's just there to show that, see, that's, I guess, a higher tenor and where their tessitura sits. Just to give you an example. Here's another tenor example. So the high end of the second octave, B2 to G4. That's how low they sing, basically. And you're still trying to ask me to sing below the tenors. Why? I mean, like, I can do it. But why are you acting like contraltos sing lower than tenors? I mean, even a contralto that sang the same as a tenor wouldn't sing as low as you're saying. And I understand the contraltos are being put higher than the tenors. Maybe you could argue that tenors sing on the same level as an alto, but a contralto wouldn't sing all the way down to any second octave. If anything, maybe B2. On average, I'm saying. Of course, some are going to go down to an F2 or G2. And the altos, they actually have it very high here. F3 to D5. This is why, generally for me, I never feel the contralto is a good fit for me, because I can sing way below an F3. Everyone's heard it. I mean, people have hated on it. Literally said, oh, you sang the C3 wrong. Well, I hit the C3 while not even being trained to do so. So that means I'm definitely capable of hitting a C3, which is arguably the lowest note of a tenor, and I can sing lower than that. Here again, they have the tenor C3 to A4. And then, right here, this is where the passaggio is. And, I didn't put the other passaggio in, but this one specifically shows that tenors have different passagios, okay? So here they have the tenor's passaggio higher than the other one that I showed. And I'll show that one in maybe like my community post. But it has a higher passaggio, basically. So the tenorino ends their first passaggio at F4 and their second one at BB4, which is higher than mine because mine ends at about D4 and my second one ends at about A4, which means that would fit more with tenor ligero, which is still a higher tenor, honestly. And it would seem more in common with tenor lirico because of D4. So those two would seem actually more in common for me. So as far as passaggio, I've shown the tessitura, F3 to F4, and theirs on average is F3 to G4. So it's a similar tessitura, similar passaggio, and actually a similar vocal range as well for tenors. Tenors, the spinto tenor, like you can try and go with the lower tenors, possibly. And this is not the third passaggio, by the way, for these people. So that's not their, they go into head after A4. Now, tenor robusto would be more of the lower one that I saw, which ends at C4 for their, chest voice, but start their head voice basically at around an F4. So see, that would be a little bit lower than mine for the tenor robusto, which would be more of the lower tenors, which I think is what I originally saw. But that would still basically put me right in between tenors and contraltos, honestly, because the contraltos I've shown, and I've shown them, their transition points, as you can see, is, well, that's soprano, oops, is actually like around, it's around E3 to about E4, and then their middle voice is C4 to F5, and then their head voice is around F5 to B5. Oh, oops, I'm reading the wrong one. That was mezzo soprano. I was like, that's a little high. What? No, that's actually contralto right here. I'm sorry. Contralto is actually D3 to G4 or A4 for their chest, and then the middle voice is F4 to D5, and then their head voice is E5 to A5. So that's basically putting me right in between because their head voice starts at D5 or around D5, basically. My head voice starts at around C5. Well, their head voice actually starts at E5. Mine starts at C5. My middle voice ends, I guess, transition point is A4. So I'd be right smack dab in between them and even the lowest tenor. And the higher tenors, honestly, like Ligero, fits right with me. Honestly, tenorino would actually literally be kind of like a mix between the contralto and the tenor, which makes sense because they have an alterino that they call it as well. So it makes sense that they have a commonality with the contralto, basically. So I'm just pointing this out that, for me, I think I fit on the lower end of the contralto, and you guys just have a weird idea of what you thought a contralto was. Looking back at this, it implies you think a contralto is basically a female bass. And I'm not saying there's no female bass out there. I do think that there are female bass that sing bass and baritone types. I never claim to sing in the baritone or bass vocal types. I've always felt baritone is a bit too low for me. Tenor would be more appropriate for me. That's why I sing generally tenor songs. Or baritone, but baritone I think is just the low tenor. Most likely the robusto tenor. Some people might call it baritone, but it's really just probably a regular tenor. But yeah, that's why for me that's the similarity there. I think if you look up the Tenorino, they sound